And this is the grand welcome. So thank you all for being with us. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. My name is Taryn Ford. I'm the Senior Director of Communications and External Influence here at the Colorado Health Foundation. I have a few things I just want to set up with us and share some additional housekeeping items, and then we will officially get started. So for those of you who don't know us, or maybe just know us a smidge, here at the Colorado Health Foundation, our mission is focused on bringing health in reach for all Coloradans. And we do that work in a variety of ways, predominantly by working in the communities across the state of Colorado, through investing in grant making, through our policy advocacy work, through capacity building, and certainly through moments like this one today, where we're gathering together to explore complex matters related to inequity and health. And I'm really excited to introduce our very first 2021 virtual event in the At the Heart of the Matter series, which is, of course, featuring our president and CEO, Karen McNeil-Miller, who's been hosting these regular sessions and conversations really almost a year now, since the pandemic really overtook the world and we were not able to get together in person anymore. And we've designed each conversation just a little differently. Sometimes we've put them together in a way that enables us to talk to many of you who are Coloradans, of course, and to hear about the communities that you live and work in. And other times we've designed these conversations to allow us to explore and just consider what it'll take to create a new and more equitable normal. And so for today's conversation, belonging is an antidote to racism. Karen is joined by Professor John A. Powell, who's the director of the Othering and Belonging Institute at the University of California, Berkeley. Professor Powell is, of course, an internationally recognized expert and thought leader in the areas of civic rights, civil liberties, structural racism, racial identity, fair housing, poverty, democracy, you name it. Basically anything that is crucial to our mission at the foundation, and certainly many of those that you all care about. So just a huge welcome to you, Professor. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to hear from you. So just a couple final housekeeping items, and I just want to note, if you've just popped in, I know we still have folks joining, please do share your name and where you're beaming in from in the chat. And as everyone's using the chat function today, just make sure that you are selecting the drop down that, let's see, that actually says all panelists and attendees. Make sure you're selecting that drop down, and that'll ensure that everyone can see everything that you have to share. So we are recording this conversation today, and we'll share that recording along with a short email survey. We'll send that out to you via email in the next day or so, so just check your inboxes for that. We do really value your feedback and comments here at the foundation, so please make sure to share those with us in the survey. We'll also make sure there's a recording available on our website in the next few days at www.coloradohealth.org. And because we do have hundreds of folks dialed in with us today, we have muted audio to minimize that background noise. And rather than host a specific Q&A period, we are just inviting your comments and questions, your tips and resources throughout the course of the event using the chat. So just make sure that you send those out to us. We'll do our best to address everything. And also, if you're experiencing any technical issues or have questions about the interpretation services, please do send those to us in the chat. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce JC Futrell, aka Panama Soweto. He's a spoken word artist, a hip hop performer, and the director of education at RedLine Contemporary Art Center here in Denver. He's going to be treating us to a special performance. So welcome, JC, and I hope that all of you enjoyed today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Taryn, and thank you all for attending today. I'd also like to give a shout out and a thank you to the Colorado Health Foundation, not only for having me, but having this event, this very important conversation that you'll be having today. It's an honor to be here with Karen McNeil-Miller and with Professor John C. Powell. You know, in following the work of social justice and activism It's an honor to be here. So thank you. And where am I right now? I'm actually in RedLine Contemporary Art Center, where I am the Director of Education. RedLine is located in the historic Five Points neighborhood of Denver, Colorado. For those of you guys dialing in, if you're not familiar with Five Points is Denver's only historically cultural neighborhood. And it gained that recognition from the contributions of Indigenous and BIPOC communities that do live within its boundaries in this zip code, and most notably African Americans. My family is from this neighborhood. My grandfather, I see in this chat, I see the Harlem of the West. We get into that. We are in the Harlem of the West. My grandfather, who was born in this neighborhood back in 1921, went on to become a Tuskegee Airman, and I was raised in his home. And so it is an honor to work in this neighborhood and serve this community with arts and social justice. The mural that you see behind me is one that was created by a good friend of mine, an artist by the name of Thomas Detour Evans, and I think it's really appropriate for the backdrop today, as we're going to be kind of talking about what that othering and belonging looks like, especially in this context. So happy Black History Month, everybody. And remember that Black History Month is every month, because Black history is American history. And as soon as we recognize that, I think that we will be willing to have the kinds of conversations that are necessary for the healing that we need. And with that being said, I would love to get into this piece that I was blessed enough to read during the 40-year anniversary and celebration of the Black Panther Party in Harlem, New York. I was an invited guest by the Black Panther Party to read this particular poem, and it was an honor to do so. If some of you guys, who are, keep up with your movies, might have already seen Judas and the Black Messiah, an amazing movie by Ryan Coogler and more. And I think that as we're talking about freedom justice movements, that we reflect on the actual actions of people that have fought for equity in this country for all. And with that, I'll read this piece for you. Thank you so much for your time. My generation's got more rights than Miranda. Evening news on the wrong side of the camera. Where my people at? Stand up, get accounted for. Holla out, we gotta get together. Storm that city hall. We've been denied our rights for too long. Same song, we need to organize or else. And my generation's got more rights than Miranda. Evening news on the wrong side of the camera. Where my people at? Stand up, get accounted for. Holla out, we gotta get together. Storm that city hall. We've been denied our rights for too long. Same song, we need to organize or else. And my generation's got more rights than Miranda. Evening news on the wrong side of the camera. Where my people at? Stand up, get accounted for. Holla out, we gotta get together. Storm that city hall. We've been denied our rights for too long. Same song, we need to organize or else. I am the anthem to a country without honor. I'm a social activist whose speech is only free after 9 p.m. with weekend minutes. I am the diet brand version of a revolutionary. Let freedom ring. Let freedom ring. And the stem of every crack pipe. Let the blue smoke lift until it sets off the fire alarms in heaven. Let freedom ring. For the 100,000 souls that are trafficked into America every year, 80% of which are women, slavery still exists. Let freedom ring. I am a failed suicide attempt. I am the scar as a constant reminder. I am peace and quiet. Let freedom ring in the canals of the lower Ninth Ward. New Orleans, where the only debris left after Katrina are the living and breathing people. Let freedom ring for Nicholas Hayward, Amadou Diallo, Paul Childs, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, and any other life wrongfully taken by those sworn to protect us. Let freedom ring, because I am the last tear Mandela shed in captivity. I'm the only bullet Fred Hampton fired in defense of his home. I am Joe Lewis's left cross that crippled Nazi Germany, and I am Jesse Owens' running shoes. I am the first star that Mae Jemison wished upon. I would rather drown my children than allow them to be born into a life of servitude, because I am the color God painted the universe with. I am God's grief. I make raindrops feel like falling bricks. I am LAPD's red bullseye and the malnourished mouth that inspired the free breakfast program. I am a bomb in a Baptist church. I am the struggle we. Let freedom ring in the brothels of Thailand, the world capital of child prostitution, where American businessmen write off their crimes on their tax returns because there is no more tool shed behind the old plantation. Let freedom ring in Fallujah, where Shia Muslims would rather set their flesh on fire rather than live under Western rule. In the canisters, Haitians and Cubans drift in to find their freedom down the barrel of a gun in Darfur, Sudan, in the hands of an 8-year-old soldier in Uganda. Let freedom ring, because I am all of the things the Black community just refuses to talk about anymore. I am back to Africa, inequality, AIDS prevention, vaccination, incest, and hope. I am your spook, your coon, and your BET, Uncle Tom. I am 63 cents on the dollar compared to the average wages white men make. I am the answer to the question, what are we going to do with all of our unwed teenage mothers? I feel more comfortable in calling you my nigga than I do in calling you my brother, because somewhere along the line, I bought into the idea that the thing that we share the most in common is our indignity. So let freedom ring, let freedom ring, let freedom ring, until it makes a sound we all can actually recognize. And my generation's got more rights than Miranda. Evening news on the wrong side of the camera. Where my people at? Stand up, get accounted for. Holla out, we gotta get together. Storm that city hall. We've been denied our rights for too long. Same song. We need to organize, or else. Thank you.
JC, thank you. I hope you can see all the snaps and the positivity and the love and the thanks and the appreciation and the understanding that is on these comments. I'm gonna, if you got a few minutes, I want to chat with you about that point.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You know, I read it in advance, and even just reading it, it got me viscerally in many ways. And not that wasn't always negative. You know, as a mother, reading the line and then hearing you perform the line of, I'd rather drown my children than let them live a life of servitude. As a mother, that makes me think, what would I do that? What would it take for me to have that belief? But then, I'm the right cross of that stopped Nazi Germany. I was like, yeah, he did that.
Yes.
You know, so I got that feeling. And then the things, particularly Black people, and you called us out, the things we don't talk about anymore, and the things that demonstrate that we bought into the lie.
Yes, ma'am. We
bought into somebody else's narrative of us rather than claiming who we really are and our own resilience. So when you were thinking about this poem, What were you? You told us what you were trying, where you were commissioned to do it.
Yes,
For the anniversary of the Black Panther Party.
yes, ma'am.
How does it make you feel to write something like this?
It you know, every time I perform this piece, it kind of tears me apart a little bit because it takes me back to the place that I was in when I wrote it, and the place that I was in when I wrote it was one of hurt and pride at the same time, and thinking about all of the struggle and strife that our people continually go through just to be seen in this world, not even to be treated as equals, as equal valued members of an amazing society that we built with our own bare hands. And even to this day, as we look back and reflect on the events of January 6th, and knowing that slaves' hands built the Capitol, and seeing the Confederate flag just waved with pride in that building is sickening. And it reminds us of how far we've come, but how far we still have to go. And with that, we have to recognize all of the good and the bad and the in-between, and tell the American story the way that it is. When we continue to shame ourselves over our own history, we can't get past the same page, right? And I'm all about looking at those pages in history that have been willfully taken from us, willfully ripped out of the book, willfully not even written in the book. And there's so much for us to share and so much for us to build upon based on those things. And so it's to kind of to come back around to answer the question. Writing the piece and performing the piece constantly reminds me of all of the things that are uniquely Black and beautiful here in this country and beyond.
So JC, if you had to add a verse about COVID, what do you think would be in there?
You know, that's really interesting. I was just having this conversation with someone just yesterday about the numbers, the horrible disparaging numbers between African American vaccinations and not. And I had this conversation about the Tuskegee experiments, where we're talking about, African Americans being used as guinea pigs, by the U.S. government to see the effects of syphilis on the population. And the idea of what vaccination looks like for people of color. I have been fortunate enough to receive my first dose of the Pfizer vaccine, as well as my mother, and she's 75 years old. But that didn't come without some real reflection about trusting this government and what they have done with our bodies and what that actually means. And so if I were to add another line about COVID, it would be that COVID really has told us the story of who we really are, which is we can't survive without each other. That I need you to be healthy as you need me to be healthy. And so we have to trust in each other to be able to get over this.
Oh, thank you. Now I'm going to ask John Powell to get on video and join us. I noticed you were a little starstruck, so I'm gonna give him a chance to join the conversation.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Karen, and thank you, JC, and thank you to Colorado Health Foundation. So it's really great to be here. And so JC, I love that poem. My only question, Black Panthers, that's Oakland, man, not New York.
Oh yeah. I know, right? I wish I'd have been invited to the Black Panthers 40-year celebration in Oakland too. That would have been, absolutely amazing, And the Black Panther Party, since I was a little kid, and reading the words of Bobby Seale and Chairman Hampton, really influenced my outlook on this country and where we stand as a people, and why it is absolutely necessary to claim our power. That if we don't claim our power, it will be claimed for us. And this is that moment for me was actually a very powerful moment. I was actually able to make salat with over 200 Muslims in Riverside Park in Harlem, New York, during that 40-year celebration. And so, I wish I'd have been invited to Oakland too. That would have been
this pandemic is going to be over, so we have to get you out here.
Yes, sir.
again, I think very, very powerful, very informative. A lot of people don't realize that one of the major reasons for the forming of the Black Panther Party was police brutality.
Yes.
So here we are,
Yes.
dealing with police brutality.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you, and want to get out there and visit you in Colorado at some point.
Oh, you are welcome, brother. You got a room in our house anytime. Yes, sir.
Same here.
So much. It's an honor.
JC, thank you so much for your gift and for honoring us with your gift and your time today.
Thank you. I'll be sticking around.
All right, great.
If anybody wants to find me, just shoot me an email. I'll
Excellent.
talk to you all soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John, we are so glad to see you. We have been trying to get our calendars to match for a while. So I'm so glad it finally worked out that we could have this conversation.
I'm looking forward to it. And it's always great to see you, and appreciate the great work you do.
Absolutely. We have a lot of folks joining us. It's primarily or predominantly a Colorado crowd, but not exclusively a Colorado crowd. I notice we've got folks from people that are signing in from New York, from DC. There may be some Canadians, some folks from the UK joining us, and it's, I wish I could say they were joining to see me and hear me, but it's really you they're joining. They all agreed they wanted to join in here. So I'm just excited to have this conversation. Now, I know you've been to Colorado a couple of times, and we will be happy to welcome you back in the future. But I'm not going to assume that everyone who's joined us today already knows about your work. So how about just take some time and explain the concept of othering and belonging.
Okay, great. Appreciate the question. So I'm the director of something called the Othering and Belonging Institute. And I know that's kind of a wonky word. I mean, people think, what is othering? But once you think about it, it's like looking for a yellow Volkswagen. Once you think about it, you see it everywhere. And the institute I run is fairly large, over 150 people total, about 100 professors at Berkeley, and then a staff of about 40 or 50. And when I first came, it was called the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society. And it was organized around, professors were organized around 7 clusters, dealing with disability, dealing with race, dealing with gender, dealing with religion, and dealing with sexual orientation and so on. And what occurred to me is that all of those foci, if you will, was dealing with being other. All of them, so whether you're, what we could call intersectionality, whether you're dealing with race, whether you're dealing with gender, in a sense, you're dealing with the phenomena of being other, of saying you don't fully belong. And so I wanted something to actually create a deep foundation to show that all of these efforts had a common structural foundation. They express themselves differently and they have different histories, but they're all about othering. And the solution to othering, when we finally notice it in the United States, we assume the solution is saming. You know, we want to treat everybody the same. And that's not the solution. The solution to othering is belonging. And when we look at it through that lens, we see it all around the world. We see in India, we see it in Germany, we see it in Brazil, we see, and it takes on different forms. So the penultimate way of othering here in the United States has been around race, especially anti-Black racism, but it's not exclusive. We've done a terrible job in terms of how we treated Native Americans, how we treated Latinx, how we treated Irish, how we treated people with disabilities. You know, when Hillary Clinton ran for office, one of the things that made it difficult, but 20% of Americans felt that no woman, not Hillary, no woman should be president of the United States. So the sexism that gets played out. And Kamala Harris is now dealing with that as vice president. So Kamala's a friend of mine from here in the Bay Area. So we deal with all these multiple things. So othering and belonging gives us a lens into that. So we're all really struggling to be recognized and to fully belong. In Maslow, when he talks about his hierarchy of needs, it's physical safety, food, belonging. and some of his students say he got it wrong, that the first platform is not physical need, it's actually belonging. Because if we don't belong, we don't have physical safety and we don't get food. We literally come into the world attached to another human being. And so as JC said, we need to turn toward each other instead of against each other. And what we're seeing in the world is an explosion of both othering and an aspiration for belonging. We're seeing both of these impulses at the same time. And which way we're going to go is too early to say. But what we do matters. If we can really turn toward each other and create a world where all human beings belong, all human beings, then we'll be doing something.
Thank you, John. Now, I know you have a soft voice, and I'm sure you've heard this before. People are having a hard time hearing you.
All right, I'll try to speak up.
All right, thanks. So my head is swimming where to start. So right now we have a lot of conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion. Compare and contrast where othering and belonging fits in there, or where belonging fits in there.
That's a great question. So I sometimes say, so we were the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society, part of DEI at Berkeley, and we switched. And part of it, I think of inclusion. So diversity is just a fact. It's a description. It's saying there are people of different races, of different ages, of different sexual orientation. That's diversity. It doesn't mean that they're welcome. It doesn't mean that we acknowledge them as being fully human. We just, yeah, they're here. So we've always, in a sense, been a diverse country and a diverse world. The world has gotten smaller. So diversity by itself is not normative. It's not saying we value it. It's not saying it's important. It's not saying we treat people with kindness and dignity. It's just saying we got a mix of people here. So we need to go beyond that. And inclusion was what was added. So we don't just want to have a diverse set of people. We want people to be included. So DEI moved to the I, the inclusion part. But the limitation of inclusion is this. And that's a movement. It's a positive movement because historically we have excluded people. So now if we say we're including people, that's a movement. But the analogy I give is that I'm giving a party, and all 1,000 of you are invited. But here's the deal. It's my party, my music, my food, my friends, and it may be a good party or bad party, but it's my party. And at the end of it, you got to leave, right? So you come to the party as a guest. That's inclusion. Inclusion is you're joining something that's already there and you're a guest. And so all of the accommodation is placed on you as a guest. You know, we don't wear shoes in my house. Take your shoes off. We don't eat meat in my house. No, you know, we don't drink alcohol in my house. So all the accommodation is on you. You don't get to make the rules. You find out what the rules are, and then you adhere to them. That's inclusion. Belonging is where we co-create. So now I'm not giving a party. We are giving a party. And who's going to invite? We're going to invite our friends. We're going to pick our music. We're going to pick our food. It belongs to us. We co-create the thing we belong to. And if it's a whack party, it's our fault. We are responsible. I'm not responsible. If it's a great party, it's our responsibility. So belonging is predicated on a number of things, but one of them is co-creation. Another one is power. In order to co-create, you need power and agency and responsibility. We're responsible for this thing we're co-creating. It's not already there. And so a lot of groups are starting to shift to that because they think about, you know, if you go back to the language of the 80s and 90s, we talked about be tolerant. We should tolerate people who are different than us. Really? You know, that's the goal, to tolerate people? No one wants to be tolerated. People want to be full participants, to have a voice, to have power. Now, here's the thing, though. When you're co-creating for belonging, sorry for that background. You're not just co-creating for yourself. You have responsibility to all the members, and you have a responsibility to the institution itself. So in some sense, you could say it's the most radical form of democracy. It's full participation. So that's what makes it different than a DEI. And if you go on Berkeley's website now, it says DEI and belonging. So we're starting to make that shift, that recognizing that inclusion is not enough.
So using that definition, that analogy of inclusion, people of color then would say, so we've been included for a few decades now, but it's still somebody else's party that we go to. And, we use things like we have to code switch when we go to that party because they don't eat meat at that party. And because they do play that music at that party, and we just have to get our mind right. To go into that party. That's work. That's work for people. What's the stress that kind of work of going constantly being at somebody else's party on their rules? What's the stress like of that? What are the mental health implications of that?
You're right. I mean, it's tremendous stress. So to not belong, to be other, has very serious empirical health consequences. We can measure them. One of the basic human needs is to be recognized and to belong. And so from a baby to a 100-year-old adult, we need to belong. And to say you can only belong on my terms is to say you don't belong. I oftentimes cite James Baldwin. James Baldwin, a Black gay man in the 50s and 60s, was writing beautiful, insightful literature. And at some point, one of the high literary entities invited him to join. And he wanted to join. It was important to him to be recognized. All of us need to be recognized. And they said, Mr. Baldwin, we want you to join. But here's the thing. Don't bring riffraff to our august setting, which meant don't bring Black people. You can come, but don't bring your Black friends. And then they went on to say, and we know you're gay, but don't remind us. And what Baldwin did is he actually left the United States. He went to France. He was brokenhearted. And he wrote a book called The Price of the Ticket. He was saying the cost of joining was too high. So you can join, but leave yourself at the door. And he came back in the midst of the civil rights movement. But too often, that's what we're told. You can come, but leave all that Black stuff, leave all that gay stuff, leave all that stuff at the door. Don't remind us that you're not really one of us. Do the code switching you need to do. And my friend Claude Steele has written about this in a book called Whistling Vivaldi, which literally is about Black people in Hyde Park in Chicago. When they see white people coming, they would sometimes whistle classical music to signal to white people that they're not a threat. Not hip hop, not blues, not Motown, because that might scare white people. So part of our job then, in terms of if we don't really belong, but we're in someone else's space, is how do we make them comfortable? Not how are we comfortable, but how do we make them comfortable? And it's not that we don't want to be whatever, but we need to actually show up with our full self, especially as a people. And one of the fights in the United States right now, the country is deeply divided. It's like, whose country is it? Well, once we leave Native Americans, everybody came here in some form or fashion, and it's our collective country. It's not the Republicans, it's not the Democrats, it's not white people, it's not Black people, it's not Native Americans, it's not Asians, it's all of our people. We need to make this country together and make it so we all belong. That's the work. That's what Obama used to call our unfinished business. But some people, it's like, no, you don't belong. Stay in your neighborhood, stay in your country. I'm building a fence and a wall and a prison to contain you. And I'll let you into public space on my terms. That's not acceptable.
And I would imagine our tribal friends would say they've never been part of the inclusion.
Right, right. And of course, I mean, it's always tricky for me when, Thanksgiving, right? Because it's a celebration of Native Americans saying to starving British folks, welcome, here's some food. And they turn around and sort of take the country from them and call them savages. So the point, and we've measured this, and there's two concepts. One's called allostatic load, which is biometrics of how we're doing. And a lot of the work's done by a colleague of mine named Haas. But the Black community has more allostatic load. Now, what allostatic load measures it measures stress in the body. And by some accounts, Black people are biologically one age and physiologically another age because we're constantly dealing with stress. Now, we all have to deal with stress, but the Black people in America, I say to people, make a fist, release, make a fist. You can do that all day, but hold a fist like this and just hold it. Within 2 minutes, your hands start cramping. That's the experience of many Black people in America. We never get a chance to relax. Maybe when we go to 5 points that JC talks about, but when we go to the store, when we go driving our car, when we go to the school, it's a constant thing of being under surveillance. I just read the other day that a young kid, 18 years old in Texas, walking home in the middle of a storm, and he's underdressed because the storm came up and he's walking from work. The police see him and they arrest him, right? It's like he's walking home from work. He's 18 years old. And the police later say, well, they didn't realize he was at work. They didn't realize he was 18 years old. I'm thinking, what the hell did you say to them when you stopped them? When you stop someone, you ask them their name, you ask them what they're doing, you ask them, but to them, he's not a young Black kid, he's a threat. He doesn't belong. And so it's like the response to society is, you don't belong, I'm pulling out my gun, I'm harassing you, I'm arresting you. And the police have since apologized, but how did that happen? How is it that seeing a young Black kid in the middle of a winter snowstorm, you see a threat instead of someone needing help?
And unfortunately, it's not just Black folks in this country that can tell that same story. Unfortunately, our Hispanic brothers and sisters can tell that story, not for as many years, but that's still their story now. And certainly with COVID, our Asian and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters have come under so much more threats of racism, actual acts of racism, racist attitudes. And those are all instances of othering.
Right.
And that different means bad for some reason. Now I'm going to go back to the party. When it becomes our party, don't I have to give up something as the person who was the host?
Yes and no. The main thing you have to give up is an illusion, because you were never in control. And if you oppress people, that's your job. You may run a company, you may run a nursing home, but when you oppress people, that's your number one job. You got to do it all the time. Toni Morrison wrote some time ago, she said, we for years have studied what the enslavement of Black people did to Black people. We haven't looked at what it did to white people. Mm-hmm. So yes, you give up your anxiety, you give up your fear, you give up your need to dominate. Now, for some people, that's how they identify. They think of themselves as in control. They think of themselves as superior. They think of themselves literally as dominant. And yes, they have to give that up. They have to give that up. And they can give it up, nicely, or they can give it up not so nicely, but they have to give it up. And W.B. Du Bois talked about that. He said, we traded in democracy for white supremacy. You can't have both. Mm-hmm. So if you want to have a world where your own humanity, now why would the police arrest that young kid? In a sense, they are expressing not just their racism, they're expressing their own fears. They really are afraid. They see a Black kid, and there's all kind of work in terms of implicit bias work by my friend at Stanford, Jennifer Eberhardt, showing that if you show people, white people in particular, a subliminal picture of a Black man, you excite fear. They can't even consciously see it. You so fast consciousness can't see it, and it still stirs up their nervous system. So we have over 300 million guns in this country. We have more guns than people. And I'm not talking about the military or the police. I'm talking about in civil. Why do we need so many guns? Because we are afraid. And how do we deal with the fear? More guns. You know, and we've had all of these mass shootings. Doesn't make people safer. So yeah, you will give up something. You give up that fear, that anxiety, that domination. For some people, that'll be seen as a threat. But you get something. You get to be human. You get to be in relationship. You get to relax.
Talking about fear, I saw a video of yours where you talked about your grandfather, who I think lived to be an octogenarian, but that means he lived a long time and lived through a lot. And you said that he died afraid of white people.
Right. And it was sad to me. I was going away to college. I was in college. I went to Stanford, and there weren't many Black people there. And we were organizing. We're trying to do what JC said organize. We're trying to organize, JC, just as you said, to make some demands on the school, because the school, you know, to welcome us, they had one of the psychologists at the school meet with us on one of the grassy knows, and serve us watermelon. Welcome to Stanford, right?
Oh, no. No, that did not happen.
It did happen. It did happen. So yeah, we had to organize. And so as we organized and made demands, my grandfather heard us talking, and he said, "John, you better leave those white people alone. They don't play." And it just struck me that he was 83 years old when he said that. He grew up in Mississippi. He and my dad, my mom were sharecroppers. So they were in a situation which Isabel Wilkinson described as a caste system. They weren't used to having, making demands on white people. Their place was, I mean, literally when I grew up, there was times people would say, "You don't know your place as a Black person." And I'd say, "I don't have a place. My place is everywhere." Now, police doesn't believe that, because if you think of things like racial profiling, I did studies on this, profiling happens the most, not in Black communities that people might think, but when Black people wander into white communities, upscale white communities, that's when the police come down. It's like, "What are you doing here? This is not your place." But it was sad to me that my grandfather went to his grave terrified of white people. Now, he had a reason to be. There were lynchings in his town. People got killed. People didn't get service. Police couldn't get loans, redlining. So there was a whole system that supported him. He wasn't, you know, delusional for believing that, but it's a narrow way to live his life. And at least now, at least for many of us, I think we are demanding, insisting that we're full human beings, and the country needs to come, and the world needs to come to terms with that.
Do you think there's still a critical mass of people of color, whether they are immigrants, whether they are Native American, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islanders, Black, that still are afraid of white folks?
Yes, I think they are, and you know, and sometimes we're afraid of each other. I mean, Jesse Jackson talks about that. He said when he's walking down the street at night and he hears a footsteps behind him, and he turns around and sees white people, he relaxes, right? And this is Jesse Jackson, right? So the insidiousness of white supremacy and white dominance has its hard edges in the white community, but it actually spills over to other community. You know, someone talks about the first word you learn as an immigrant when you come to this country is the N word. So the insidiousness and fear, even people, I lived in Africa for a number of years. When Africans come here, they're often told, "Don't associate with Black Americans." So we're talking about an ideology, and we're struggling with that ideology right now. And I think we're seeing a country deeply divided, but part of the divide is about fear, about a sense of threat, even when there is no threat, a sense of being, so when the Proud Boys march in South Carolina and they say, the Jews will not replace us. Now, I read this stuff and I teach this stuff all the time, and I haven't read anywhere where the Jews are talking about replacing the Proud Boys. But they believe that. They believe. And so, now here's the thing. So white supremacy is real, and it's ubiquitous in the United States. But there's a flip side to it. We sometimes make it so big and so powerful. And my good friend Derek Bell, who was one of the founders of critical race theory, he believed we could never crack white supremacy. It was going to always be there. It's this monster that's just unslayable. I don't think that's true. I think it's fragile. And so even while we deal with it, we have to deal with it in a way that doesn't deny our own power. We can do something. When we come together and decide to do something, there's almost nothing that can stop us. So yes, I do think that even in reading about and studying about white supremacy, I worry a little bit that we are rarefying it away to this monster that can't be slayed. And it's not. It can be slayed. It was invented. It has a history. It's different in different places. And we can move this.
I agree with you that it is a monster that can be slayed. And I agree with you that it's born out of fragility and still exists in a fragile state.
Mm-hmm.
And is some of that fragility because of what you just said a moment ago, that it's what you have to give up is the illusion, but the illusion itself is so powerful?
Right. Right. Well, you know, I mean, you saw it after the murder of George Floyd. I think a good number, I don't know the exact number, but maybe probably more than half of white people are struggling to get off and under white supremacy themselves. It's a rotten deal. A friend of mine wrote a book called The Wages of Whiteness, and his name is David Roediger. And I said, David, you need to write a new book called The Declining Wages of Whiteness, because what you got for being white at the beginning of the 20th century and what you get today is very different. The world has changed. You know, I feel like, you know, we may have a bad trade deal with the Chinese, but part of the United States' obsession with the Chinese is that they're not white. The New York Times a number of years ago ran an article, and the article's headlines was, for the first time in 300 years, we're heading to a world where the dominant power will not be Christian and not be white. That's probably true. For some people, that's a terrifying fact. So when people say in 2045, there will be no racial majority, we can measure many white people experience that as a deep set of anxiety and fear. So that's the bad news. On the other hand, the fastest growing group in the United States is interracial, interethnic families. So people, if they live together, if they stay together, many of them will find ways of, you know, making a family. And so you have all these things happen at the same time. You have people really reaching for a society, a world where we all belong, and people reaching for a society where only they belong. You have both of these things happening at the same time. And unfortunately, they're reflected in our political parties as well. And it's not clear where we're going to land, because it's not just individuals. They're powerful people, they're institutions, and there's money. So people aren't coming up with these decisions by themselves. They're getting help from TV, from the news, from social media. But we have to engage it. And if we engage it, I think we can do something about it.
How do you, well, let me back up. What are some of the other trends? You talked about interracial marriages. What are some of the other trends that are helping us tip the scales from othering to belonging?
Well, it's interesting. So as people say, demographics is not destiny. The world is changing, but how we make meaning of that change is up to us. We have some agency in this. And one way that we do that is through stories and cultures, but also through structures and institutions. So here are some trends. And there's a recent piece by Charles Blow, who writes for the New York Times. He talks about 4 migrations. And he says there are 4 giant migrations happening in the United States now. One of them, he says that by, I think it's 2060, the Latino population will be more than twice that of the Black population. So we're seeing a huge growth in the Latino populations, including immigrants. And there's almost nothing we can do or necessarily should do to stop that. The country is going to be much more influenced by Latin population. Secondly, we see people moving because of climate change. The projection is that half the country now is being affected by extreme weather. That's going to increase. And so you can have a lot of movement, people reorganizing themselves on that. The third, of course, is like looking what's happened in terms of the pandemic. It's going to cause, again, people to move. I'm here looking at San Francisco outside of my window. San Francisco was like the #1 business city in the United States, if not the world, before the pandemic. It's not anymore. People are fleeing. So, and part of the fleeing may be good. Part of it's the pandemic. Part of it's technology. Technology gives us the capacity to maybe work at home. So we're going to reorganize work. And if you don't have to be someplace to work, where do you have to be to live? So that's another major. And then the final one, he says, which is interesting, is that we're seeing Blacks moving back to the South in record numbers. And now he says we're back to 2010. So there's a reverse migration of Black people going back to the South. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and I think it caught Georgia by surprise. And now they're trying to figure out, how do we make sure those Black people don't vote? So when Trump expressed concern of people still in the election, it wasn't just people who are not registered to vote. It was like the wrong people are voting. Those people are not real people. They're not really Americans, they're Black. And so literally, even after you have every major commission, judge, anyone who has any kind of clear eye, Republican, Democrat, conservative, or liberal, who say there's not substantial voter fraud in the United States, end of story. So what are we doing now? Virtually every Republican state is instituting stricter voting laws to make it harder to vote. Well, wait a minute, you just said there's no problem with voting. So why do we need stricter voting laws? Too many of y'all voting. So these are the trends that we're dealing with. And so one way of dealing with that trend is like, if there are too many Black people, can we disappear them? Can we other them? Too many Latinx, can we? Again, for some people, that's a source of fear. If you can't win Georgia, then where can you win? And but there's another way of thinking about it, that it's not a zero-sum game. That when Black people win, it doesn't mean white people lose. And there's a nice article basically saying, if this country wasn't organized so deeply around racism, we'd have Black people across the political spectrum. We'd have as many Black conservatives as we have white conservatives. There's nothing innate in Blackness that makes us liberal. We are, as a group, anti-racist. And so really what gets conflated with conservative is racism. And that's not necessarily the case. And so it's racism that's sort of undergirding a lot of our politics and a lot of our economy.
John, I think you talk about there are kind of 4 tenets or pillars in creating belonging. It's power, agency, love, and I forgot what the 4th one is. Responsibility. Talk about those 4 and how we can help use those to move us more towards the belonging. How do we use those to help the people who have benefited from othering start to shift?
Right. So start with agency. You have to have a sense of agency. Just means a sense of who you are and ability to do things. So you have to have a sense of who you are. In a sense, my grandfather couldn't participate in this because he didn't feel like he had agency in relationship to white people. He didn't feel like he belonged. He felt like his role was consigned to him and was not that of an equal. And that's how he went to his grave. So you have to have agency, a sense of who you are and who you're becoming, because we're not just static. But you have to have power too. Power just means the ability to impact things, to affect things. So we're talking about changing systems, changing structures, changing cultures. The ability to do that requires power, requires capacity. And sometimes we have to be deliberate about the power. If the power equation is too skewed, we can't actually affect change. And I'll give you two quick examples. One example is, think of the book Bigger Thomas, Native Son by Richard Wright. So Bigger Thomas in that novel doesn't have the same power as his white counterparts. And so he can't engage them. And I won't, for those who haven't read the story, I won't tell you, but it creates tragedy. And the white liberals want to skip over the power. They say we're all the same, even though he's the chauffeur and he works for them. They say we're all the same. Well, they're not the same. And they don't deal with the power differential, and it leads to tragedy. A more modern version of that is the movie Knives Out. And I don't know if any of you have seen it, but if you need something during the weekend, look at the movie Knives Out. And there's a scene in the movie where this woman is a Latino, Latinx, and she is a caregiver for the family, for the father of the family. And the family's very rich, and they're very condescending. And at one point, they're discussing undocumented immigrants. And her name is Maria. And they say, Maria, what do you think we should be doing about undocumented immigrants? Now, she's Latinx herself, but at home, her mom lives with her and she's undocumented. And she can't participate in that conversation because she needs that job. And they know that, and she knows that. And so sometimes the power differential is so great that people can't really participate. They can't engage in a project of belonging. So we have to make sure we deal with agency, power. Once we have agency and power, we have to have care and love. We have to care about the people, because Dr. King said, power without love is tyrannical. Love without power is sentimental. So we're not talking about liking people, but not having any capacity to affect change. But we're also not talking about just having power, but it not being grounded in love. And so we have to actually care about the people. There are a number of people who said, like, to be a revolutionary, a social justice worker, you have to love the people. And too often we don't. And then finally, we have to accept responsibility. Because if we're co-creating, if it's our party, it's our party. We're responsible for what we get. If it's a bad party, it's our fault. It's our collective fault. And that's a different way of talking about both looking at our history and our future. Because sometimes when we look at our history, we argue about it, whether it's Confederate flags or generals, or the enslavement of Black people, or the taking of Native American land, or the Immigration Act that wouldn't let Chinese into the country. It's like, we feel shameful, right? And if you're white in the think you're attacking America. It's like, well, no, it's not. It's not. From me, from my perspective, I have very little interest in white guilt, or any guilt really, because then the focus becomes on fixing the guilt. I need to feel better, it's like, okay, do whatever you need to do, but we have a responsibility to fix this society. And we need you showing up, ready to work, white, Black, Latino, X, and so, and if you don't do that, then I have a problem. So responsibility says, yes, okay, we did some things, we as a country have done some things that we should correct, we should be ashamed of, whether it's reparation or whatever, but we can fix it. We can fix it, but it requires us, one, being aware of it, two, sort of having a vision of where we want to go, and three, being responsible. We're all responsible. We all have power. We all have capacity. We all have agency. We're going to co-create this world together. So those are the tenets. And any one of them missing, so if you don't have agency, if you don't have responsibility, if you don't have power, if you don't have love, then you're not going to create a belonging society. And if you have power without love, you're likely to create a breaking society where everyone's fighting everybody. You're using your power against other people because they are seen as the other, they are seen as the threat. And so it's both being able to see clear-eyed all the stuff that we've done, but at the same time, have love for the people. I often say it's important to be hard on structures and soft on people. Too often we're soft on structures and hard on people. And so we think the way to deal with racism in the United States is to get white people to feel really guilty. I think that's a cul-de-sac.
So in those four, there are two of them that I see as pivotal conversations that we have to have, and in moving to more of a belonging society. So on one hand, it's with white supremacy, there is power hoarding.
Mm-hmm.
So what? How do we help people to not hoard power?
Mm-hmm.
Then on the other side, I can hear people of color saying, "You want me to love my oppressor? I don't know that I have that capability." So now, how would you respond to either of those kind of arguments?
So on the power hoarding, again, a lot of the power hoarding comes from fear. And it's sort of interesting because we talk about these things broadly, but the reality is, like, there's a new study out, for example, in terms of wealth disparities, huge 10-to-1 wealth disparity between the Black and white community. It turns out the vast majority of that disparity is at the top 0.1% or 1%. If you look at the bottom 50%, poor whites are barely better off than poor Blacks. But when we use that aggregated data, it's like all whites are better off. And I know that's not true. I mean, I might not be as well off as my white counterparts at Berkeley because of the history and legacy of wealth transfer. So my parents didn't leave me money. They left me love when they died. They didn't leave me money. Whereas my friends, it's like my parents have 3 houses and we use that. So, okay, there's a differential. But at the same time, I'm not in the bottom 50%. I'm not in the bottom 75%. I know, and so part of it is just to recognize the influence and power that we do have. And sometimes there used to be a saying, Karen, that they used to say, Black people can't be racist because race is discrimination plus power. And we don't have power. And that just was wrong. That was People's Institute used to say that a lot. And I love the people at the People's Institute, but they were wrong. We always had power. We may not have enough power. The question is, how do we use that power? And so the thing is that to do something, to build something takes a lot of energy. To tear it down doesn't take much at all. So for those who want to hoard power as a way of trying to create safety and security for them, again, it's a fool's errand. You can't have enough power to be safe if everybody is against you. And the scourge of white supremacy, there are many, but one of them is, it is power hoarding, but also, and Isabel Wilkerson talks about this, she says, caste systems are always organized around purity. Now think about that. You have a big, beautiful house and it has to be pure. Then one microscopic thing entering your house has destroyed your purity. So to the extent that white supremacy and white dominance is based on purity, it's always anxious. It's always worried about being contaminated. And that's why you have the 1-drop rule. It's like 1 drop of Black blood, that's some powerful magic blood, right?
Right.
Destroy whiteness. It's like, okay, y'all in trouble. Because we're going to destroy whiteness. It's a fiction. And so even with all that power, there was always deep anxiety, deep fear, and not really a happy way to live. And so what you really trade in saying, okay, you don't need to be afraid of Karen. You don't need to be afraid of John. We are coming after not white people. we're coming after white supremacy.
White supremacy,
Uh,
white systems, white supremacist systems.
and I say this, you know, sometimes we conflate them. We shouldn't. And all of us have work to do. And so if you align yourself with white supremacy, okay, we have a problem. But it's not the person that I'm overly concerned about. You know, we're very conscious of police right now, right? But as police systems have diversified, they haven't necessarily become less of a problem. We assumed it was the white police officers, and sometimes it is. I don't give them a pass, but a lot of times it's not. So in George Floyd's case murder, one of the policemen who's there was Black. He had joined the police force to address anti-Black bias in the police department, but he was part of a system. He got inculcated into a system. And so when we just focus on, it's like when we say, is it a bad apple? We say, no, it's bad soil. We got to deal with the soil. It's not, in fact, if we get a good apple, we should be cheering, because with that bad soil, it's amazing we have any good apples. In terms of why and how we should love, so a couple of things. White supremacy is based on, is from my perspective, it's based on at least 4 separations. It's humans separated from, if you believe, humans separated from God, humans separated from nature, humans separated from each other, and humans separated from ourselves, the mind and body split. And so we have these huge separations. And when I asked my father, who's Christian minister, so what is death? He said separation. So white supremacy, from that perspective, is built on death. Now, when you believe that you're separated from nature, then nature becomes both something to be exploited and a threat, which is what we're dealing with climate change. When you believe that you're separated from people, whether it's men separated from women or white separated from any other people, it puts you in a constant state of tension and death and domination. You have to dominate that thing that you're separated from and afraid of. And it never really works. And so you're in a constant war, constant fight. And then bring it home. You're separated from the mind and the body. So now the body becomes something that I don't really understand and like, and I have to use my will, my mind to conquer the body, which is very much part of white supremacy in Western society. But it never works. The body's not going to be conquered. The will is not that strong. So that's what you're giving up. You're giving up a chance to be fully human. Everyone's getting a chance to be fully human. So when we fight white supremacy, we have to be very careful not to mimic it.
Not to what?
Not to mimic it.
Mimic it, okay.
So they're based on separation. So, okay, you want to be separate from me? I'm going to be separate from you. You hate me, I hate you. You kill me, I kill you. What's the difference? We've actually lost already because we've accepted the underlying fundamental principles of white supremacy. We just changed, maybe it's not white supremacy, maybe now it's Black supremacy. And so what I say is that what we really are against is supremacy. What we really are against is domination, period. Whether it's Muslim domination of this Hindu's domination of Muslims, whether it's men's domination of women, it's like we are against, whether it's people dominating the planet. We want to live in harmony. That's the goal. Now, if people say, don't believe in that, can't do that, then continue doing what you're doing. But if you continue doing what you're doing, you'll keep getting what you got.
Well, in these last few minutes we have, the questions are rolling in, so I'm going to try to get to some of them. And I want to focus on the way forward. So are there places around the country or around the world where you see that they're doing a good job of belonging and eliminating othering and being hard on systems?
Yes. I mean, the first place that comes to mind, which comes to mind for everybody, I'm sure, is New Zealand. And actually, it's interesting. Someone said that it's not across the board, but women leaders tend to be more likely to embrace expressions of belonging. Certainly the Prime Minister of New Zealand, even when there was the murder, she refused to turn that into a thing sort of to bash a group of people. And she did, I think, she did a pretty good job. The virus itself, do you use the virus to become afraid of everyone because you might have the virus or I might have the virus, or do you use it for us to connect together? So I think once we start looking for it, there are really a number of expressions of belonging. There are a number of cities. We're talking now to half a dozen cities that want to become belonging cities. And we say, it's not just a word. It requires real practice. It requires thinking about co-creation. It requires thinking about Kaiser Permanente. It's one of the largest healthcare systems in the country, has embraced the idea of becoming a belonging healthcare system. They're not there, but 15% of the Fortune 500 companies actually not just have equity and inclusion in their statement, but they're actually moving toward belonging. They don't know what it means, but they know that what we have right now is not working. And so, we have stuff on our website, Welcoming to America, which is a large organization that works to welcome immigrants. I just talked to them recently, and they actually, interesting, and I hope they don't mind I say this, they said, if we were starting over again, we probably wouldn't say welcome to America, because that sounds like inclusion. There's a power differential. We're welcoming you, but you're the outsider. You go to their website, and the first thing on the website is belonging, not welcoming, but belonging. And so they're trying to figure out how to do that. And they have dozens of cities and towns across the country where they've done this. We're working with Kellogg Foundation. They want to record 100,000 acts of solidarity, 100,000 acts of people expressing belonging. It doesn't make the news. It's not, if you kill somebody, if it bleeds, it leads. But there are all these positive examples that are out there that we have to lift up and mimic, and then institutionalize in a much more serious way.
And we've got lots of folks that are on this call that work with young people, from preschool, daycare, early childhood through high school, and probably more people on the call who are parents themselves. How do we as adults help foster belonging in our children?
Well, there are a lot of practices, and there's some books on it now, but one of the things is, one of the practices associated with belonging is bridging. Basically, how do you connect people together, especially that appear to be different in some important ways? And the sweet spot for that is to engage in compassionate and empathetic listening and practice. A lot of belonging is advanced by recognizing. The politics of recognition. Charles Taylor, a Canadian philosopher, has written a lot about the importance of being recognized, just being recognized. I mean, think about that. When we have a ceremony, we have a dinner, we say, we want to recognize these people, right? Why? Because that's literally a spiritual practice, is to recognize them. And you can do that with children, and we do it. Say, oh, you got, two quick things. I have a granddaughter. She was terrified of math. She's in a school, and she took a math test, and I think she got, out of 100 possible points, she got, I don't know, like 20. And her teacher did something really smart. He said, "This is great. It shows that you understand some concepts and others you need to work on. The number doesn't matter so much." She's now exploding in a positive way in math. He took her fear and turned it into something that was positive. He recognized her potential. And once he recognized it, she recognized it. And there are all these studies in schools. There's a study of kids not doing well in school, and they're doing all this remediation, teaching them to read and stuff. And in many cases, they found the most important thing is, do they have a sense of belonging? That once they have a sense of belonging, their capacity goes up. But instead, oftentimes we give them a test and we heighten their fear. And there's a whole bunch of studies showing that why that doesn't work instead of deepening their confidence. So the heart of belonging in many ways, one practice is empathetic and compassionate listening and recognition of people. And we can be recognized not just by how we talk to people, but how we organize structures. So if you have a building that doesn't have an on-ramp and you have someone in a wheelchair, you just said to that person in the wheelchair, you don't really belong here. And what you're doing today in terms of this session, in terms of having closed caption, in terms of having language translation, is basically a way not just so people can understand, but basically say, this is your place. You get to actually participate in that. And it doesn't mean you just do things better. It means you're saying to people, this is yours, right? So to look for examples, to create structures, the design cultures, what's missing? Who's missing? And how do we invite them not as a guest, but to participate, not just for themselves, but for everyone? We can certainly, and kids soak that up, they love that stuff. They're easy examples. There's some movies about them. I'm trying to think of one of them. It's called, I think, the Zero Club, or I may not be saying it right. Maybe about a bunch of young girls and how they create, a sense of belonging in society.
Somebody says it's Troop Zero.
Zero Troop. Troop Zero. So it's really
Zero, yeah.
Yeah, it's really a sweet movie, but it's about these concepts.
Someone asked a question. I'm not sure I understand it, but I'm going to read what they wrote. How do you create a sense of belonging among disparate folks if your group doesn't have any diversity? And I think it means, is diversity a prerequisite to belonging?
Yes and no. I mean, the Amartya Sen, who's an Indian Nobel economist, he makes the point that monocultures is always a myth, and diversity is oftentimes exaggerated. By that he means, so let's say you have all white people. So think about this. At the beginning, JC talked about Hitler, about Nazi Germany in his reading. At the time Hitler came to power in the 1930s in Germany, there were 4 kinds of white people in Europe. So whiteness wasn't one thing. It was actually multiple different things. And half of those at least were considered less than or not belonging. So from the outside, you might say they all look alike, they're all white. That's a homogeneous subcontinent. But within themselves, no, they were fighting. I gave a talk yesterday to some religious groups. And so they were talking about tension between Muslims and Christians and Buddhists. And I said, yeah, it's real. But there are conflicts between Christians.
Right.
I mean, the Sunnis and Shiites have been fighting for 1,000 years. So in a sense, we can exaggerate our similarities as well as exaggerate our differences.
Right.
Israel Klein's written the book, Why We Polarize. And he basically says, you can find any reason to, Gulliver's Traveler, right? It's like, if the eggs are sideways or are they up, there's no difference. I remember being a kid and I was like, so white people don't like other white people who are Jews? Interesting. As a kid, that didn't make sense to me, right? Because I saw things in terms of black and white. It's like, they're all white. And I remember saying that to someone, and someone said, not really, right? So homogeneity is, in a sense, never quite there. It's always socially constructed and being constructed and challenged and being reconfigured. I spent time in China. China is extremely diverse, all Asians, but extremely diverse. We don't see it because we have, Asians, non-Asians. And part of the thing is to recognize we all carry multiple identities, multiple identities. So age, sexual orientation, religion. We're not just one thing. Those things are constantly in flux. And in that is an opportunity both to come together and also to tear us apart.
And one of the ways, or the approach that you say helps us move towards belonging, the actual philosophy and mindset is one of targeted universalism.
Right.
So just spend a moment talking about that.
So in equity, the way many people practice equity is basically almost entirely focused on disparities. And so the concept of equity as it's used is to eliminate those disparities. And the disparities are important, so I don't want to suggest otherwise, but it's actually misstating what we're trying to do. To give you a concrete example, I work with a lot of health groups. For years, we've been trying to reduce the disparity in suicide among white men and Black men. In the last few years, before COVID at least, that disparity had almost disappeared. But not because Black men were killing themselves less, but because white men were killing themselves more. But if you just focus on disparities, you can close up shop and declare victory. They're killing them. Okay, so they're killing themselves, but they're killing themselves in equal part. But people say, no, that's not really what we wanted. What did you want? We wanted everybody to stop killing themselves. That's targeted universalism. You're saying the universal is eliminating suicide. To get there, you need a strategy different for Black men and white men and Asian men and Native American men, because they're situated differently, both in terms of structures, cultures, and that universal. But the universal is not what white people have. It's not what the dominant group has. The universal, we have to state that independently and then figure out, so that's the universal, but it's not universal strategies. The strategies are targeted, and they're targeted based on how we're situated. So I worked on a city, and actually in Portland, who were trying to get home ownership up. White home ownership was, I think, 66%, Blacks was 40%, Native Americans 25%. So initially it was like, let's get everybody to 66%. The national average is in the 70s. So we said, no, let's make the national average the universal. And that did a couple of things. It actually created movement in a certain direction, but it also stopped the breaking between whites and people of color. Because when you just focus on disparities and you're fighting over scarce resources, it's a recipe for breaking. There's not enough going around, and my group's going to lose if your group wins. That's a zero-sum thing. Target universalism is saying, no, we reject the notion of disparities. And we're not picking one group over the other. We're saying all groups should get to that universal. But what's going to take different groups to get there, it's going to take Native Americans to get to 75% is a 50% increase. It's a 30% increase for Blacks, and it's a 10% increase for whites. That's fine.
John, I want to be mindful of your time and respectful of your time. This has just been a delight. Thank you so much. The comments, we didn't get to half the questions, but people were frantically sharing resources, and we will share with them many of the resources that you named. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your time, and giving us a way to think about this that doesn't pit us against one another, but that also gives us a way of bridging. And I know we didn't even get a chance to talk a lot about bridging, but it helps us bridge a conversation that we at the foundation are really are struggling with, because we've committed in our racial equity work that we're going to be hard on systems. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we want to create a bridge to people to engage in this conversation. And that's a dichotomy that we're still struggling with how to actualize that, but it's a commitment that we've made and something we'll stick to. But this gives us just another perspective and way to think through this, to think our way through this, and to learn our way through this with community, with the various communities of the state, but particularly communities of color, and not to look at them as a monolith, but to look at their individual and distinct needs. So thank you so much.
Well, the pleasure's been on mine, and if we can be of any help, let us know. But I think the Colorado, they're fortunate to have you, and this is not an easy journey, and this is not just about health; it's about everything. But leadership and the leadership you bring to it, I think again they're blessed whether they know it or not.
Oh, thank you so much. Have a great rest of 2021, and hope we're all able to get out sooner, but not before it's time.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye bye.